Hi everybody. This screencast is going to walk you through the basics of event handling in C#. Overall, what we're going to discuss and go through is the idea of I have some controls, I put them on a form. On their own, they don't do a whole lot. They require event handlers to be wired up and created in order for you to be able to act and interact with different controls on the page. So what I have set up here is a pretty simple form. It has a combo box called CBO input, and inside of that combo box I have a small series of items. Those items are just different fruits: apples, oranges, banana, mango. I then have a button that will be the transfer button, and what I want to have happen is when the user clicks on the transfer button, it takes whatever value was selected from the combo box and puts it into this text box called txt output. So its goal is to transfer the value selected into the text box. Pretty simple. So to set up an event or an event handler, what you'll normally do is either click on the control and go over to the properties dialog on the right hand side, and you'll notice that there's a lightning bolt button and it says events. And if you click on that, it will give you a list of every event that this control has. It will by default highlight the default event, and that is the event that will be wired up if you were to just double click on the control. By double clicking on the control, Visual Studios will take the default event, wire it up with an event handler, and then give you a function, in this case btn transfer underscore click. So this function is the event handler for the click event on btn transfer, the transfer button. You can also, through the design view, highlight the control, go to the events area in the properties dialog, and you can find a controls event and simply double click on it. By double clicking on it, it will create its own event handler and give you the function that you would use to actually implement that event. So the goal is to take the value from the combo box, click transfer, and have that value show up in the text box. So in btn transfer, we want to capture the value from CBO, which is the combo box. We want to store it in a temporary variable, and then we want to set the text box, its text property, to equal the temporary variable. So to start off, we will declare a variable. Generally, the combo box will provide you with a string, and what we're actually going to want to set the text box text property to at the end is a string. So we'll declare a string called transfer value. The next step will be for us to set transfer value equal to the combo box, and I'm using IntelliSense to help me with this, so I type CBO. IntelliSense combs through all of the available functions, properties, and variables to find anything that is within scope and brings it to me kind of as a shorthand. So I type CBO and I get CBO input, our combo box. I can then hit tab and it'll auto-complete the name. So I'll go ahead and do CBO input dot to get all the properties of the combo box. I can then scroll down, or I can type in text, and if we look at the flyout, it says that this gets or sets the associated the value, the text associated with the control. So we'll go ahead and choose text, semicolon. So we've now captured the value, we've stored it in the temporary variable. So So we've essentially done both of these steps in this one line. And then the last step is that we want to set the value of the text box equal to the value in the combo input dropdown. So we'll do txt output, which is our text box control. I'll do tab dot, and we want to set the text property, so I'll start typing in text. There's our text property equals transfer value semicolon. So we don't have any red squiggles, which means that essentially there are no compile time errors. Everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and go up to the play button and start debug. It'll compile and give us our form. We can then drop down and choose apples, click transfer, and apples shows up in the text box. So the event handler for the transfer button causes this section of code to execute, which is taking the drop-down value from the combo box, storing it in a local variable called transfer value, then takes txt output.text and sets it equal to that local variable and gives us this output. Now we can do much more complicated things within an event handler than just passing values back and forth. For example, if we were to type in the word strawberries, you'll notice that strawberry is not one of our drop-down options. But a combo box gives the user the liberty to type in a value or to pick it from the drop-down. So if I type in strawberries and I hit transfer, strawberries is shown. I don't want this functionality to occur, so I'm going to modify my event handler, my transfer button click, to be more specific, to do some error checking, some validation, and to make sure that all of this is working properly. So we'll close our debug, go back into our event handler, and add some additional steps. So what we first want to do is validate that a value was selected from the combo box. If a value is selected, we'll want to capture it and store it in a temporary variable. If a value isn't selected, we need to notify the user to select a value. Assuming that all of this executes correctly, we'll then take that value and set our text box's text property to that value. So the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to do an if statement, do some logic. So on CBO input, we have a whole slew of different properties that we can work with. For a combo box, there is one particular set of properties that we want to look at, and it's the selected properties. We have a selected index, a selected item, selected text, and selected value. If we use the selected index, this will give us the index specifying the currently selected item, the position of the item in the list. So if you think back to an array, for example, you have an array which is a list of items. The combo box essentially has an array of items stored within it. That's your items property. It's a collection. What we want to figure out is which one of those items, the position of that item, is selected. So we say if combo box.selectedIndex is greater than -1. If an item is not selected, the combo box selected index returns -1 because there is no value in the combo box being selected. So we say if the value is greater than -1, basically meaning that 0 or higher was selected, one of the items, then we want to capture the value from the combo box and store it in the temporary variable. Now we can grab the txt input, but it's probably better for us to actually grab the selected value. Now, in the case of what we're doing, we're storing text objects or text items inside of this combo box. So what we want to do is we want to take the selected item, which, if I mouse over this, is returning an object. You'll notice that first line in the pop-up, it says object combo box.selected item. That is the property signature for this property, selected item. It returns an object. Well, we have a variable that stores strings, so we have to do a little bit of casting to make this work. Now, if you're familiar with Java and C++, the normal convention for doing a cast is to do in parentheses in front of that variable, you put in the type. So if we do string CBO input.selected item, we're casting the selected item to a string. You will notice that we don't have any underlines, so we're not getting any compiler errors being detected by Visual Studios. Now, if our selected item is not a string, let's say we made a modification to this code and all of a sudden our selected item is no longer a string, this will throw an exception at runtime, which we don't want. We try to avoid exceptions as much as possible. So what we want to actually do is use a different method of casting, something that I recommend using for all objects. There's the as cast. So if we put the property CBO input.selected item inside of parentheses and we say as string, what .NET attempts to do is it'll attempt to cast selected item as a string, and if it can successfully, it will cast it and then set transfer value equal to that string value. If .NET cannot cast selected item as a string, let's say for example it's actually a date time, then what will happen is that transfer value will be set equal to null. So instead of throwing an exception, a casting exception, it will simply fail silently and it will then return null as a value. Now this particular line, as string, can only be utilized with objects or variables that are classes. If you have a structure, which is generally your integers, your floats, your booleans, those cannot be used with the as cast. You have to use what I showed previously, which is the parentheses type cast. So we're now saying transfer value equals combo box input dot selected item as string. The next piece is if the value isn't selected, then we need to notify the user. So we'll say else, and we'll use the message box to notify the user. So we'll say message box dot show, and we'll type in our message to notify the end user that they need to select a value from the combo box. Now we have a lot of different options off of the message box.show, and I won't go through all of them, but I'll just highlight a few things. So there's 21 different overloads that can be used here. Half of them go back to using Win32 APIs and having Win32 window handlers. It's very far beyond the scope of this course, but you may run into a situation where you may need that in the future. So you'll notice the first method is passing a string of text for the message. The next one is passing in the Win32 window as well as the string of text. And you'll see that happen with every method I go through. You'll see a Win32 window option and then the parameters that were listed previously. The next option is to pass in a string and a caption, and we'll put in a caption saying warning. And if we keep going, there's the Win32 window again, and then the next option is text being passed as a string, caption being passed as a string, and then there's message box buttons. So if I do a comma and then I can press Control Spacebar, that will give me IntelliSense. It'll pop up. The IntelliSense knows what message box buttons is and will give me the option right here in this drop down. So I can just click on it and it will then pre-populate. Now one thing to note is that the icon next to message box buttons is two yellow boxes. The two yellow boxes indicates that message box buttons is an enumerator. You'll notice if you look up above, message box has a different icon, and this is the icon for a class. Message is a different type as well, and it's actually a structure. So a structure has this type of an icon, a class has this type, an enumerator has the two yellow boxes. Methods have their own, as well as properties and fields. So that's something to kind of clue in on, is the different types each have their own icon. So I'll click on message box buttons, and then I'll put a dot in, and what it does for me, let me get this dialog out of the way. What it does for me is it will give me a list of the different values. So these are essentially the different types of button configurations that you can use in a message box. In this case, I'm just going to have it say OK, but I could do abort, retry, or ignore, OK and cancel, retry and cancel, yes, no, or yes, no, cancel. So those are all different options for your message box. I'm going to go ahead and put a comma in and see what additional overloads I have. So we just looked at message box buttons. There's the next one, which is the message box icon. So I'm going to do a control space again. It's another enumerator. So I'll hit tab, and then I'll put a dot in there, and what it's going to tell me is here are the different message box icon options. I'm going to choose the exclamation this time, and then what that'll do is put an exclamation icon in my message box. If I do the comma again, we still have a number of different ones. We have a message box default button that we can set. We have an overload that takes the message box icon and the default button, and additional message box options. So you're welcome to look through those at any time you feel is convenient, or you may find an application for one of these in the future. So I'll go ahead and finish my line here, and then since this is an else statement, I'm going to go ahead and have this function return. I want it to terminate at this line. I don't want it to continue on because obviously the value was not selected correctly, so I don't want to continue on executing any more code until they select a value from the combo box. So if I scroll down a little further, we'll see that it says set the text box to equal the temp variable. So again, our line of txt output.text equals the transfer value. That looks good. We'll go ahead and jump up here and hit the play button again, have it compile. Here's our form. So I'm going to type in strawberry and hit transfer. I get the warning with the exclamation mark that says please select the value from the combo box. Hit OK. I'll drop down. I'll choose mango, hit transfer, and it works. So our validation worked, our event handler worked, and everything seems to be in place. So as you build more complex forms, you'll find that you can use event handlers for keyboard input. You can have event handlers for having something occur every time a value is selected. So maybe a selection changes in a drop-down, or you have a checkbox that's checked, or a radio button that's selected. You can have event handlers on any of those types of events so that you can have changes occur to the form. Maybe you have areas that are enabling or disabling. You can have different things happen where additional boxes pop up, and in later podcasts I'll have it set up so that you can actually see how we can build menus and menu items and toolbars, and you can wire up events for those menu items so that you have different independent actions occur when you click or select or interact with one of those items. Thanks.